Hello all. Today we will learn the Edwardian period. The term Edwardian applies to the British Empire during the reign of King Edward VII from 1901 to 1910, but it is usually extended up to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. When Queen Victoria died in 1901, her eldest son, Edward, succeeded to the throne as Edward VII. The Conservative Party was then in power and Mr. Balfour was the Prime Minister. Soon the Boer War was concluded. It was fought between the British Empire and the Boer states of Transvaal and Orange Free State. It occurred in South Africa from 1899 until 1902. It was won by the British and resulted in the Union of South Africa. Balfour resigned in 1906. The Liberal Party under Campbell Bannerman formed a ministry including remarkable men like Asquith and Lloyd George. They passed a number of useful reforms. On Campbell's death in 1908, Asquith became the Prime Minister. The most interesting event in Asquith's ministry was the People's Budget of 1909. It was an attempt to redistribute wealth by increasing welfare payments to the old and the needy. Chancellor David Lloyd George delivered the budget. It was not passed by the Conservatives in the House of Lords. This caused a constitutional crisis. It forced an immediate general election in 1910. The Liberals were returned with a much reduced majority and the budget was eventually passed by the House of Lords. It also led to the passing of the Parliamentary Act in 1911, which removed the power of the House of Lords to reject money bills. The constitutional crisis happened in the last years of Edward's reign. His brief reign lasted only 9 years. Edward VII died in 1910 and was succeeded by his second son, George V. George V's reign began amid the continuing constitutional crisis and it led to the passing of the Parliamentary Act. In 1914, the First World War broke out. Although sports and other forms of play gained traction in Victorian times, the Edwardian period brought them to international heights. The Olympics were first held in England in 1908. The brevity of the period means that many of the authors associated with this age are also associated with the preceding Victorian period or with the Georgian and modern period. This age included notable poets such as Thomas Hardy, Alfred Noyes, W.B. Yeats, etc., incredible novelists such as Joseph Conrad, Ford Madox Ford, Rudyard Kipling, H.G. Wells, etc., and dramatists such as James Barrie, J.B. Shaw, John Galsworthy, etc. Thomas Hardy's first collection of poetry was not published until 1898. His poetical works are included in Wessex Poems, Poems of the Past and Present, Time's Laughing Stocks, Satires of Circumstances, and Moments of Vision. Alfred Noyes' first collection of poems, The Loom of Years, was published in 1902. His most notable work is his ballad, The Highwayman. His poetry collections include The Flower of Old Japan and Drake. Noyes' only full-length play, Sherwood, was published in 1911. William Butler Yeats was an Anglo-Irish poet and a prominent literary figure of the 20th century. He was the leading figure of the Irish literary revival. It was a literary movement began in the late 19th century and lasted throughout the early 20th century, which revived interest in Ireland's heritage and focused on the growth of Irish nationalism. Notable authors associated with the movement include W.B. Yeats, James Singh, Lady Gregory, etc. Along with other writers of the movement, Yeats co-founded the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, which provided a stage for generations of Irish dramatists. Yeats became the first Irish to be awarded the Nobel Prize in 1923. The first collection of poems by W.B. Yeats, The Wanderings of Ossian and Other Poems, was published in 1889. Some other poems include The Wind Among the Reeds, The Green Helmet and Other Poems, Responsibilities and Other Poems, etc., and plays include Countess Kathleen, Deirdre, etc. Joseph Conrad was a Polish-born British novelist. His notable works include Lord Jim, Heart of Darkness, Nostromo, The Secret Agent, etc. Rudyard Kipling was a British author born in India. He is best known for his poems and stories set in India during the period of British imperial rule. He was Britain's first Nobel laureate in literature. Kipling is best remembered for his collection of short stories, The Jungle Book. Some of his poems are Gunga Din, The White Man's Burden, Eve, etc. His other works include The Jungle Book, The Second Jungle Book, and the novel Kim. Ford Madox Ford's major works of the Edwardian period are the Fifth Queen trilogy of historical novels about Henry VIII and Catherine Howard, the trilogy of Impressionist books about England and the English, and the novels A Cold and The Good Soldier. Edward Morgan Foster was a novelist, essayist, and short story writer. His notable works include Where Angels Fear to Tread, The Longest Journey, A Room with a View, Howard's End, A Passage to India, etc. Henry James was an American-born British author. He is well known for his works like The Portrait of Lady, The Bostonians, The Wings of Dove, The Ambassadors, The Golden Bowl, etc. Arnold Bennett was one of the remarkable literary figures of his time. He was the author of The Old Wives' Tale, a masterpiece of realism. He published his first novel, A Man from the North, in 1898. This was followed by Anna of the Five Towns, Clayhanger, The Card, etc. H.G. Wells was a writer of science fiction works. Wells' first novel, The Time Machine, was an instant success. His other significant works are The Invisible Man, The First Men in the Moon, Tono Bungee, Flow Games, An Englishman Looks at the World, etc. John Galsworthy was one of the most popular writers of the early 20th century. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1932. His notable works include The Island Pharisees, The Man of Property, which began the novel sequence to be known as the Forsyte Saga and established Galsworthy's reputation as a major British writer. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a Scottish-born author of detective stories and historical romances. He was originally a physician. He is the creator of the popular fictional character Sherlock Holmes, based on whom Doyle authored more than 60 detective stories. His first detective story, Study in Scarlet, was published in 1887, introducing the character of the detective Sherlock Holmes and his loyal assistant John Watson for the first time. In 1893, Doyle attempted to kill off the character Sherlock, but after incredible pressure from his readers, he was forced to reintroduce Sherlock in 1901 and published a number of new stories. He served as a doctor in the Boer War and wrote books defending Britain's participation in that conflict. In 1900, his non-fiction book on the Boer War, The Great Boer War, was published. In 1902, he was knighted by King Edward VII in recognition for his efforts in South Africa. In 1905, he came out with a series of 13 Sherlock Holmes stories titled The Return of Sherlock Holmes. Doyle wrote several works of historical fiction including The White Company, Rodney Stone, Sir Nigel, and a science fiction novel, The Lost World. A.C. Bradley was an English literary scholar and one of the most intelligent and respected critics of William Shakespeare. From 1901 to 1906, he was professor of poetry at Oxford University. All his published work was originally delivered in the form of lectures. Bradley's Shakespearean tragedy is recognized as a classic Shakespearean criticism, which presents a psychological analysis of Shakespeare's characters. 5 years later, he published Oxford Lectures on Poetry, which includes an essay on Antony and Cleopatra. His other works include Poetry for Poetry's Sake, a commentary on Tennyson's In Memoriam, etc. J. M. Barrie was a Scottish novelist and playwright. He is best known as the creator of Peter Pan. The first appearance of Peter Pan came from Barrie's first novel, The Little White Bird, published in 1902. Later, he adopted the story into a play titled Peter Pan or the Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, which gained huge success after its first performance. This was the story of a boy called Peter Pan who refused to grow up. He meets a girl called Wendy, and together they have adventures in the magical land of Neverland. Barry penned several plays based on Peter Pan and adapted the play Peter and Wendy into a novel format. His other works include 12-Pound Look, Half an Hour, etc. John Millington Synge was one of the leading figures of the Irish literary revival and was one of the co-founders of the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. His major works include In the Shadow of the Glen, Riders to the Sea, The Aran Islands, It's a Travel Journal, The Playboy of the Western World, The Tinker's Wedding, etc. Sir Arthur Wing Pinero was a leading playwright of the late Victorian and Edwardian eras. His major plays are The Magistrate, The Gaylord Quakes, Iris, His House in Order, Mid-Channel, etc. Henry Arthur Jones was among the most prominent British dramatists of his time. He achieved success with The Silver King. His other works are The Liars, Mrs. Dane's Defense, etc. Although Galsworth is best known for his novels, he was also a successful playwright. He concentrated on the social problems of his day in his dramas. In 1906, Galsworthy published his first play, Silver Box. Stave, written in 1907, is one of his most successful plays. His next play, Justice, enacted in 1910, was part of a campaign to reform prisons. Lady Augusta Gregory was an Irish writer. She was remembered as a key figure in the Irish literary revival and the co-founder of the Abbey Theatre. Gregory's best plays were Spreading the News, The Rising of the Moon, The Workhouse Ward, etc. George Bernard Shaw was an Anglo-Irish playwright. He joined the Fabian Society in 1884. Shaw was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1925. He contributed more than 60 plays to English literature. Shaw's earliest plays were published in 1898 as Plays Pleasant and Unpleasant. The unpleasant plays were Widowers' Houses, The Philanderer, and Mrs. Warren's Profession. In these plays, Shaw forced the audience to face unpleasant facts. The pleasant plays were Ams and the Man, Candida, The Man of Destiny, and You Never Can Tell. In 1901, he published Plays for Puritans, a collection that included The Devil's Disciple, Caesar and Cleopatra, etc. Other plays are Man and Superman, John Bull's Other Island, Major Barbara, The Doctor's Dilemma, Pygmalion, Androclus and the Lion, etc. Shaw's plays are known as plays of ideas or problem plays. Problem play is a type of drama that was popularized by the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen. The concept arose in the 19th century as part of an overall movement known as realism. A problem play deals realistically with a contemporary social, economic, political or moral problem. It is essentially a drama of ideas. Shaw was a major contributor to the popularity of problem plays. The First World War began in 1914 and ended in 1918. King George V continued in the throne until his death in 1936. Let's conclude. Thank you for watching.